Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, a disability discussion with Kathy Villarreal, with special guest, her husband. So it'll be nice to get both perspectives of somebody who deals with invisible disabilities and the people that are by their side. My name is Sarah Jo Ritchie. I am the volunteer coordinator here at the Ehlers-Danlos Society, and I'm your moderator today. This webinar is part of our ongoing series, Living with EDS and HSD. So this is how today's webinar is going to work. Webinar attendees will be muted at all times during the webinar. However, you are able to type any question you may have throughout the entire presentation into the question box at any time. Kathy won't be able to see or respond to these questions until the Q&A portion at the end of their presentation. Please do not send your questions more than once. It won't increase the chances of having your question answered, and it will only make it harder for us to sift through the questions to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. Kathy is coming to us today from the West Coast. Now, Kathy's story is similar to so many in our community. After being symptomatic her whole life, Kathy finally got her diagnosis at age 53, after many tests, procedures, and surgeries. Kathy is joining us today to talk about the many variables of disability and how it is involved with EDS and HSD. She will also be talking on the subjects of recognizing others' disabilities, whether they're visible or invisible, how we can support each other, and different ways to educate the public so there is a better understanding as a whole. There is a common stigma around individuals with disabilities, especially when you have an invisible disability like EDS or HSD. As our community is well aware, having that invisible disability and being visible can be very challenging. Our hope here at the Society is that Kathy's talking points start a wider conversation in our community that expands to the world. Thank you so much for being here, Kathy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Villarreal, and I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Though I have been symptomatic my whole life, I didn't get my diagnosis until I was 53 years old and over 23 surgeries later. Like many of you, I do struggle every day with my EDS, with good days as well as bad days. In addition, I hope to touch on some of these points with you and some of the ways I can help you overcome them. I was struggling with so many ailments, and I went to the doctor. Actually, I went to doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist, and nobody was able to pinpoint the problem. I was prescribed with medications to little to no success, and some with bad side effects on top of that. But through the process, I kept pushing forward for answers. And finally, I was able to see an RA specialist, rheumatoid arthritis specialist, who put the time and effort into my case, and I was finally diagnosed. I was finally diagnosed, and I finally felt validated, and I'm sure a lot of you understand that. The other thing too is I finally felt like, see, I wasn't making it up this whole time. I really am sick. I really do have a problem. So being able to put a name to it, it made me feel so happy and excited. And the interesting thing was my doctor didn't understand why I was so happy about it. But just the fact that I now had a name to what I had been going through, it was, my answers were prayed. My prayers were finally answered, excuse me. My doctor made it clear to me that this was nothing to be excited about, and that I had a long road ahead of me. But I was okay with that. After all, I really didn't know anything different anyway. But I needed it. I needed to be validated. Now that I knew that what I was dealing with, I started researching it. I started making connections to other conditions that I had, and that were conditions that are connected to EDS. Unfortunately, my primary doctor didn't know anything about EDS, but luckily he was willing to learn from me, and he helped me build a team of doctors who understood EDS, which is truly, truly helpful. We were then able to put a plan of action together for my health. You know, in the sense of views of disability, people are looking for that physical sign of disability, like wheelchair bound, missing a limb, etc. And a lot of us who have Ehlers-Danlos, we follow those same idealisms, unwilling to acknowledge that we have a disability, even though we suffer daily from it. I myself, after I'd have a surgery, I had to go to the store and my husband would hand me the walker and it's like, I'm not going to use the walker. I'm going to deal with this. So, which was the wrong attitude to have. I've grown from that, but I do know that a lot of us do struggle with that. Most doctors are fully aware of Ehlers-Danlos and don't look for it more often than not. It's passed off as something else or we're misdiagnosed altogether. Or the famous, it's all in your head. Pharmacies, even though they're not medical doctors, they do feel that they can make diagnoses based on your condition, based on your appearance and prescriptions. I struggle every single time I go to get my medication with the pharmacy. Every time, it's a royal pain. Insurance companies are also quick to judge based on old information, and a lot of times they're not willing to authorize services or medications as a result. My insurance does this thing where they look up this government site that they have, and it's 10 years old, but they still go off of it. And it's very frustrating because I have to kind of find a way to prove, and my doctor has to help try to find a way to prove it. And so it works out in the end for the most part, but it's one more thing to add to our daily lives. Variations of disability. We all suffer from different degrees of EDS, as there are 14 different types. Some of us have mild conditions daily, whereas others can be bedbound and everything in between, really. The complexity of EDS can lead to varying degrees of symptoms daily, if not hourly. What doesn't hurt one day can hurt the next, or vice versa. Just remember the spoon theory. It truly does help. Due to the variable degrees of our condition, we need to have the proper tools in place to support us. And that can be anything: braces, crutches, walkers, wheelchairs, etc. We've all heard this, and let me start over with that one. You look fine, just get over it. It's all in your head. You're a drug addict, or you're going to become a drug addict. We've all heard this. We'll probably continue to hear it. People love to make snap judgments without any knowledge of what's going on. Just remember that you truly know what you're dealing with, and they most likely will never understand. So do your best to not let it get to you. It's their problem and not yours. But be true to yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be hurting and paying the consequences of it later. It's just not worth it. Hidden disability. We are zebras. We are referred to as zebras because in the medical world, there is a phrase, when you hear the hoof steps, they don't expect to see a zebra. This means they're looking for the obvious and not for something different. A lot of times getting a diagnosis with EDS is difficult because it's not widely recognized. But other hidden disabilities like mental health issues, for example, tend to be quickly diagnosed because it's perceived to be more common. Understanding the variation. Even though we all suffer from some variation of EDS, we react differently depending on the degree of the infliction. This simply means our daily experience is not necessarily the same as somebody else's. And we shouldn't compare ourselves to each other, but rather share our stories to gain knowledge. Please remember that we are not here to judge one another, but to support each other. Developing a support system. Research, research, and more research.
Research who knows about EDS.
Research doctors who knows about EDS or specializes in EDS to start building your team regarding your ailments. Reach out to your EDS communities and support groups. They are your best resources. Many of them have found doctors and can recommend them to you. They can give you tips and tricks to get you through your daily routines. You can also watch webinars and attend conferences when possible. They're full of info that you may not have known about and often explain aspects of our condition. The spoon theory. We all have a certain number of spoons in our drawer to perform our daily tasks. We have to be careful as to how we spend our spoons, as to not to overdo it and pay the consequences later. My daily life depends on my spoons. I seriously live by that theory. It truly helps me. Educating others. Many people don't understand what we are going through, or they have a hard time coming to grip with our condition. The best thing that we can do is educate them and keep reinforcing what we go through and how quickly it can change. More often than not, doctors need more convincing than family and friends because of the zebra syndrome. They also need to become more familiar with your specific condition, rather than EDS as a whole, because our biggest advocate is ourselves. Overcoming judgment from others. We cannot be responsible for others, only ourselves. Our health and well-being is our top priority. We can do our best to educate others and spread awareness. Continue to utilize our support systems and advocate for ourselves. And above all else, know that you are not alone. We can do this together.
Hi, so my name is Carlos and I'm Kathy's husband. And I just wanted to kind of follow up on a couple of points that she had talked about. First part would be really understanding your condition and what you can and can't do. And an example is that, as we talked about the spoon theory, counting your spoons. And this is where connecting with the community can really pay off. About 2 years ago, we had gone to the Baltimore conference, and we had decided that we were going to make a trip out of this with our son, and we went to New York for a few days. And spent 3 days in New York walking around, trying to see all the sights, doing everything. But Kathy was getting really, really exhausted. And by the time we'd gotten home, she was just basically reeling in pain. She was dealing with her sublocations, her dislocations, and it wasn't going away with any type of quickness. And it actually lingered for a few months, to be honest with you. About 8 months later or so, we were able to attend Laura Bloom's presentation of Issue with My Tissues. And if you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. In her little documentary, she had spoken about how she had trained for the London Marathon and everything that she had gone through with the process. And while you're watching it, you're making all the same connections with her, in the sense that, okay, I understand that. I understand that the pain, the muscle point, the joints. You're making all the connections. When she finished with the presentation, she gave a follow up to what had happened at the marathon. That she did complete it, but the fact that it took her 5 months to recover from it. And when she said that, we both looked at each other, going, "That's why it took so long for you to recover." And not only did we use our spoons for the day, the week, the month, we used about 4 months worth of spoons in about 3 days and just did not realize it. And that was one of the most important parts about connecting with the community, because we didn't put the two together like that. And so that was really, really important for us. Kind of one of those little aha breakthroughs. And the same thing happens with the conferences. The first year we went to the conference, in Las Vegas, we were like, well, okay, what is this? What is this? And we were getting overwhelmed with information, but we were trying to get as much of it as we could. When we followed up the following year in Baltimore, everything made so much more sense. Okay, well, that's what that means. Okay, that's what that means. Well, that's how that's connected. All the pieces come together so quickly. And so that's really one of the points that we would like to make in this is that reaching out and understanding all the intricacies that go along with this disease. There's no manual that basically says this is what's going to happen to you. It doesn't work that way. It would be nice if it did, because then we would know what to expect. And so that was one point I wanted to make. Another one is like when we talk about the disability portion of it, it is difficult for other people. My family has a hard time understanding what she goes through, having to explain to them why we can't attend things or why we can't stay long or why we're just unable to do some particular things. Even her friends have had the same issue. They can't understand or they just can't deal with it because they don't know what it means. And that's part of the stigma because they're like, you look fine. If we go to the beach and post a picture of us at the beach, well, you were well enough to go to the beach. That's not the point. That was one good day. Can't go to the beach every day. Things of that nature. People not understanding the severity of what we go through, the severity of the pain that we go through. All of that goes with it. It is difficult. One thing that Kathy does quite frequently is she wears her EDS t-shirts or sweatshirts or her coffee mug, her phone case. She advertises EDS quite a bit in order for people to go, what is EDS? What does that mean? And then start spreading the word like that. Also, too, when you start, other people start coming out of the woodwork, meaning that we were in the Bay Area and we were at a flea market, and somebody saw her sweatshirt and ran over to her and said, "You have EDS. I have EDS. I have to talk to you." And it made a connection that way. You start seeing other people and then you connect with them. I met a young woman at a job fair that I was conducting, and she came in with the silver splints on her fingers, and I asked her, and she has EDS, and she said, "How do you know?" Well, my wife has it. So she was happy to hear that somebody else had it, that she met somebody, not that she was happy that somebody had it, but she met somebody else who had it. And when I saw her again a few weeks later, she said, "The funniest thing, I ran into 3 more people." That's part of the awareness of the disability, is being able to advertise it, for lack of a better word, so that people become conscious of it, start asking questions. What does that mean? And then that helps spread the word more and more. And then people go, well, I suffer from something similar. Maybe I have it. And all the best they can do is ask and follow up with it. Those were some things that I thought were important to touch on during this process with the disability and understanding. Again, you all live with it day to day. What you deal with can be different than what we deal with, but we still deal with it in some fashion and trying to get through it. And that's why it's important to build those support groups, connecting with meetups for other people who may have Ehlers-Danlos, or even starting a meetup for people with Ehlers-Danlos. Participating in webinars, spreading the news of the webinars, doing your research on the condition, to talk to your doctor about it. The doctors are going to say, don't self-diagnose, don't become a hypochondriac. But if you don't address it, then it may not get addressed. And so, that was one thing that we were told early on. We'll stop self-diagnosing. Well, if I don't bring it forward, it's not going to be corrected, or it's not going to be addressed. I have to bring it forward. Luckily for us, our doctor understands that and is willing to listen to us and figure out what would be the appropriate next step. That's why being your own self-advocate is so important. and building that support group around you, because suddenly once more and more doctors that are on your team who understand what you're dealing with, your care will improve dramatically. So that was a few points that I wanted to quickly touch on in conjunction with my wife's presentation. I guess I'm not sure what more we can offer at this particular point. I think we would send it back and
Well, I would like to say one more thing, just to let you guys know. Ehlers-Danlos type 3, the hypermobility part, runs rampant in my family. My mother, her brother, a nephew, me, one daughter, and one granddaughter. One of my granddaughters also has it. And it's a challenge in the sense that people not understanding, but also from day to day, what works right now may not work tomorrow. My granddaughter is, she'll turn 13 in a few days, and she wants to play baseball and, do all sorts of different things. But every time she does something, an ailment ends up stopping her in the middle of it. And it's heartbreaking. But she has to push through it. And she has a great support system with the medical field. And she's just come to the conclusion at this point that she's going to try to live a normal life as much as possible and pay the consequences later. It's really tough for, especially right at the beginning of teenage life, it's really tough for kids to have this and be symptomatic at the same time. But it's just so important for us as parents, grandparents, family members of those who have EDS to just be so supportive as much as possible, at the same time allowing them to be a kid at the same time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and just to be supportive of them, and also let them know that they're not alone in the struggles, because a lot of people feel that they're alone, and when we meet up with other people, they feel that they're alone, because they don't understand what they have, that they don't know that other people have it because they're being told it's rare. And the EDS community, the one of the mantras is that EDS is not rare; it's just rarely diagnosed. But once you have it and you see it, especially in other family members, bring it to their attention and help them get through and advocate for them to get the services and the help that they need, because without it, they're going to suffer for years to come as well before they are properly diagnosed and that they are given the attention that they need. And as you know, spending portions of your life not knowing what's going on, not knowing what you have, not knowing what a treatment is debilitating, not only physically but mentally. And we got to help and that's the only way we can overcome that is to spread the awareness and to support each other and support the people who do have it, and listen to their stories, and share your stories so that they can make better connections, because you may be suffering from something and not realize it, and then somebody can come along and say, well, I have this, like, I didn't realize that was part of this, and then you're like, I have that too. And then that helps the awareness and helps figure out what you need to do to get through that, correct it, however you want to address that. But it's really important for that sharing portion of
okay.
it. Okay, I think that's all we've kind of got right now. So we're going to send it back for Q&A.
Alrighty, thank you so much, you guys. You hit some really important points. And I think the one that stuck out to me the most is, we really do live in a world that is not disability friendly, whether it's an invisible illness or whether it's, a disability you can see. And having that support from people that do understand, that don't question everything you do, that support is paramount to building a good foundation to become a good advocate. Because if we don't speak up and talk about what we face as EDSers, the community, the public as a whole won't know, which is unfortunate, but, you know, there's the
Right.
famous quote, be the change you want to see in the world. And,
Yeah.
you know, it covers everything from dealing with doctors to dealing with family, dealing with friends, like almost anything. Like just talking about your experiences, telling your story can change your life, but it can also change somebody else's. Like Kathy was saying, a personal story from my point of view, about 6 years ago, I was bedbound. I could not get up without assistance. I started doing infusions every day, and I got to become really good friends with the nurses at the infusion center. And 5 years later, one of my nurses, her husband, and both of her sons now have an EDS diagnosis. They were searching for years, and all it took was for me to sit down and explain, you know, I have this is what it does, this is what I deal with. And just by talking to somebody, you can change your life and possibly somebody else's. Any chance we get to raise awareness and make a difference, we should take. So we've got a couple questions in, and just a reminder, if any more pop into your head as we go, feel free to drop them in the question and answer box, and we will try to get to them. So the first one that came in was 80% of the time I can walk with brakes normally, but standing and waiting in one place for more than 10 minutes is almost unbearable. Airports particularly are a struggle. Do you have any suggestions to help that situation?
The one thing, I know both Carlos and I have a suggestion for this. I travel a lot. So the one thing that I can tell you is when you make your flight arrangements, first off, make sure that there is a little box online that you can check that says that you are disabled so that they are prepared and expecting that. The other thing is when you pull up to the curb, let them know right then that you need to have a wheelchair and they will push you up and take care of your baggage. They'll do all of that for you. I struggled with that service mentally for a long time because I can do it myself. I've always had that mentality. I don't do that anymore. It's just too too difficult for me at this point, mentally and physically. So those are a couple things that I highly recommend. And then the other part I would recommend is also get yourself one of those little walkers that has the seat on it. Um, I have I have a walker that has platforms so I can put my arms up on top and push it that way because my shoulders and everything else dislocates so darn easily. I have that. My biggest complaint about that particular piece is it doesn't have a seat on it. And they've not figured out a way to put a seat on it yet. So I've gone ahead and purchased the other walker that you push with your hands, but has a seat on it. And that's really, really, truly helpful for me when I have to go long distance.
Yeah. For airports, I definitely recommend getting the wheelchair. When you show up to the airport, the airline should automatically be offering, or the airport should automatically have it available to you. Um, and that's one thing that when my wife travels by herself, that's what she does, because they will move her. You're seated. They're able to move her from platform to platform, um, in order for her to get where she's going without having to exert a lot of energy, because she's carrying a few carry-ons, a lot of her own personal effects. Um, so that's something that I do highly recommend. And even if you're traveling with somebody, use that portion of it. Like Kathy said, there is a little box when you hit the box if you're disabled and if you need assistance, hit that box and use it. There's no sense in muscling through anything. Yeah. So yeah, don't, because you're going to exhaust yourself and it's going to make the traveling experience much worse. Also, something I would recommend is get your TSA pre-screening. It helps streamline it a little bit better than going through the regular. When Kathy travels, she's got metal in her body from joint replacements, so she goes off when when she wears her braces. So she has to go through all of the fun stuff, being scrubbed down, being patted down, all that fun stuff. But it does make it a little bit easier because she doesn't have to go through the full onslaught of a regular TSA screening. Um, it does help reduce it somewhat, and it makes it a little bit more convenient, and you're not under as much pressure to get through while everybody else is in line. So those are some recommendations I have for that. But yeah, make it as easy on yourself as possible. There's no sense in pushing something unnecessarily.
Those are fantastic, fantastic options. And as somebody who has used those same exact things, I know there can be a little bit of that hesitation of, well, I know that I can do this, but I know that I'm going to pay for it by the time I get to where I'm going. So it's it's a hard step to take, but it is worth it. You're worth it. You are worth every bit of help that you can get to help yourself live the best life possible. So along the same line of question, in trains and buses, I really would like to be able to use the disabled seating, but people stare and are rude. Do you have any recommendations on how to avoid that, but still be able to, use the disability seating?
That one's a little harder simply because, again, back to the old, there's nothing wrong with you. You can let them know, as bad as it sounds, tell the bus driver, that you have a disability and that you need to be seated. They're required to do something about it, because that is designated for disability amongst other things. I hate to say it, but sometimes maybe like if you ever need something that says like a cane or braces, don't be afraid to show those. Like, I need to use this. I need to sit. I need I need this available to me. Unfortunately, you're going to meet people who don't want to cooperate, but the people who operate those are required to help you if necessary. So don't be afraid to use your tools to help you get where you need to be. I mean, it sounds terrible, but that's unfortunately part of the world that we live in, is that people have to have some sort of proof. And that's about as close as we're going to get.
And that is exactly what I was going to say. A lot of times, because I do go through that. I mean, I have a handicap thing on my driver's or my car license. And I've been approached. People have actually been angry with me because there's nothing wrong with me. So more often than not, as bad as it sounds, because that's the way people are, they're visual people. I will either have a cane with me, or I have my braces on my hands. I will bring something so that people will just leave me alone. A lot of times they've already come to their own conclusion, so their judgment's already there. There's not going to be much that you can do to change their mind, and nor is it our place to change their mind. It's too much energy. So that's what I tend to do, is provide something like my cane or one of my braces or something, so that they realize I do have an issue.
That is absolutely fantastic. And just to add from my point of view, when I was in college in a big city, the bus was my main transportation. And throughout college, I had about 14 different operations, and I was on crutches for most of college. But even on the bus with the crutches, people would still give me the dirty looks. People would still say, oh, that's for disabled people. So what I actually started doing was I made a little wallet card. And this works for flights as well. Or, like you said, you might have a handicap sticker on your car, but people still approach you and say, oh, you shouldn't be parking there. With that little business card, I explained what EDS was. I gave a link to the society page so they can look up more information. And I noticed that when you present people with this card that gives them actual information, they take you more seriously. And it's a way to not only say, no, do you know what? You're wrong. I do belong here. But it also gives you a chance to educate somebody who might need that perspective that they've never seen before. So
Right.
something as simple as printing out little business cards or wallet cards that explain what EDS is can change everything.
Yeah, somebody's that we met at one of the conferences actually told us about that as well. I am planning on doing that myself. Actually, I haven't done it yet, but that is one of my to-dos. Is passing out cards. Um, I myself, I try to make jewelry, and so I go to these events, and so I have an opportunity at that point to pass out those business cards. But I'm always, it never fails. More often than not, I'm always wearing a T-shirt that says EDS if I'm going to be out and about by myself. Um, awareness, 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 and that helps.
Quick funny story on the T-shirt. When she goes to see our primary physician, she's usually wearing something that says EDS. The doctor finally asked her if she owned any other shirts. She's always wearing an EDS shirt.
Do you know what? Whatever works. It started a conversation between you and your doctor, and that is worth its weight in gold. The only way we're ever going to get over these stigmas surrounding disabilities, especially invisible disabilities, are if we work to make ourselves visible. And it's
Yes.
unfortunate that we have to put that extra effort in, but by putting that extra effort in, we're not only helping ourselves, we're making a difference for our community as a whole. So, and to go off doctors, our next question is, what is the best way to deal with a doctor that doesn't understand EDS and throws out the whole, it's all in your head, you're just a drug seeker? What is the best way that you have found works for you?
Fire them straight up. Yeah, I know that might sound a little harsh, but if your doctor doesn't want to listen, then you need to move on and find somebody that does. And that's the bottom line. Um, One of the things that I'm known for, like as an example, if our insurance is going to change and we know ahead of time, I start asking, I'll go to the clinic and ask, is there a way that I can meet a doctor that I'm in a process of trying to choose? Where I'm at, uh, they have allowed that. Um, Not everybody has had that experience, but that gives me an opportunity to be able to meet doctors, and then I can figure out at that point if it's going to work between us or if it's not. Um, but no, we have had at the beginning of all of this, my I felt my doctor was doing that whole, I'm not really sure about this. And it just came across like he wasn't believing me. And I started bringing my husband with me to the appointments. And we had to between the two of us, we put our foot down with him and made it clear, I now have documentation from two separate specialists, an RA, as well as a doctor that specialized in only the hypermobile EDS type. Um, and so that's what worked. But I'm going to tell you right now that I have indeed come across doctors where I have fired them straight up, made it very crystal clear. My gastrologist doctor, he'd rather say that all of my problems are because I take opiates for pain. And I've had this problem and it's documented. I've had these problems since I was a child, but he won't work with me on it. So I made it very clear, you're not helping me out here. I'm going to find somebody else who does. And I actually found another doctor through the online communities that are in my area. Somebody recommended somebody who specializes or sees people with EDS, and I've gone to that doctor. And he's very helpful. But my whole point is that you have to be strong enough that if they're not going to be willing to work with you, then you need to move on to somebody else.
And one thing I want to add to that, if you're going to a doctor and they're not being supportive, you take somebody with you. There's nothing worse than a doctor hates more than a witness. I don't know
Very
how,
true.
because when my wife goes alone, they blow her off. I go with her, they will bend over backwards to find out what the problem is. You take somebody with you and that understands what you're going through. Like I said, a doctor hates nothing worse than having a witness that they didn't help them or they weren't willing to work with them. Definitely take somebody with you to your appointments.
Absolutely. That goes back to that support system. It's integral in getting good care.
Yes. And the other thing that I think is important to point out to the person who is asking that question is you're not alone. It is a reoccurrence for all of us in this world, in the EDS world, unfortunately. So you're not alone. Stand your ground. You are worth advocating for yourself. Keep moving forward and don't let them get to you like that.
Fantastic. You hit both really important reasons on the head. The whole support with somebody coming with you, and don't feel afraid to fire your doctor. There are
Mhm.
millions of doctors out there, and finding the right doctor is like finding the right pair of shoes. If your shoes are not comfortable, it's going to throw everything off. If you're not comfortable with your provider, you're not going to get the best care you can get. Um,
Absolutely.
there's a follow-up question that we just got in. Somebody wanted to know the example of the wording on the business card I have. So one of the things you can do is on our website, ehlersdanlos.com, we actually have a printable card that gives an overview of EDS and some of the issues we face. And that's the one that I usually take when I go to the ER or a new doctor. But for my personal ones, it's just, my name, this is what I have, these are the conditions I have, these are the main symptoms. And for like when I park in handicap spots, if that's an issue, then the back it says, reasons I park in the handicap spot. I might not look disabled, but if I'm walking down the aisle and I get a gallon of milk and I twist funny to put it in my cart and I sublux or dislocate, I need to be close to my car to get back and be okay. Or, if it's a bad POTS day and I'm feeling weak and fainty, that is another good reason to park in a handicap space. And I find that when you kind of give them a little taste of what you face, even though it's not necessarily on a daily basis, even if it's like 3 days a week you're struggling with POTS or walking, you still deserve that spot. You still deserve all of the help you can get to live the best life you can.
That's right. I also wanted to add to the question about the medical doctors. Print whatever you find on the internet, print it, and you can also take that with you as well. Because sometimes if you have it in your hand, a doctor will look at it and glance at it and kind of go, okay, now I understand it. That has also been something that has helped me in the past as well.
Absolutely. And the society also has a lot of brochures and research studies. And I've found in personal experience that if you come to a doctor with a scientific paper or, a research study done by a group that is known and, devoted to finding, cures, research, that they are more likely to look at that journal article and go, okay, this is something I understand. I see it's professional over, hey doc, I got this, and this. This is what I think we should do. By giving them sort of, I don't want to say control back over your healthcare, but by meeting them halfway, you will find that your doctor's appointments will start improving. So,
Right.
and to go sort of off that, just with the fluctuating nature of how EDS tends to be, how do I explain the fluctuating nature of my condition and disability to friends, families, and especially my employer? So, like, some days, go to work just fine, go to a family party just fine. And then a day later, you're stuck in bed recovering, and then you can't go to these things. And people are like, you were just up and walking and fine yesterday. So, Kathy, what have you found works in that situation?
I can say that I know this sounds kind of funny, but as far as family and friends, a lot of times, even though I have explained myself to them time and time again, a lot of times just having Carlos come over and explain, having a second person be there to explain that does help. I have no idea the psyche behind that, but it does work. As far as your employer, you're going to have to get a doctor's note and have it put in your records that, because in some cases you're going to need to be able to take a break and relax. Before I retired out on disability, I was lucky in that aspect. We had a little room that we can go and lie down or just go rest. And it was separate from a break room. We called it our meditation room, even though that's not what it really was, but for a lot of us, that's what worked. So, that helped a lot, but having a note from the doctor's office, and having it put into your records, and if there's ever an issue with a supervisor, you can tell them that, go look at some of my records and it'll explain things. And don't forget to remind people too, there's a such thing as HIPAA laws. So.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to the repetition of reminding them that you don't get to pick and choose how your day goes. It just doesn't work that way. There's some days where I feel fine, and there's other days where I don't. I didn't ask for this disease. Believe me, if there was a cure, I'd be first in line. But that's not the world that I live in, and I have to remind people. And it's difficult because even the people that we have known for years have started distancing themselves because they're like, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. You look okay today, and I'm like, well, that's today. It doesn't work that way. There is no specific rhyme or reason to what's going on. And that's part of that education, is reminding people constantly, like, I don't get to pick and choose that. Because if we did, I would have been sick yesterday and fine today to come and do this, but I can't. You'll be in the middle of a party and go, I have to leave. I don't feel good. One of my wife's best friends, she understood what she was going through, but it wasn't until she witnessed it before she got it. My wife was in the middle of driving, and her shoulder subluxed on her and basically almost dislocated. My wife had to pull over while she's trying to get her shoulder back in. Her knee popped out of place. Now her friend is freaking out because she's like, what's going on? She's like, it just happened. You saw I was driving. I wasn't doing anything, and I sublocated. Unfortunately, it takes for people to witness it sometimes before it really hits them and then they understand it. Her brother didn't understand it, went to help her out of the car, made the mistake of grabbing her by the wrist. Her wrist dislocated. He freaked out. He practically dropped her. It took that type of validation to get him to understand. I don't think that we have to get people, you have to go through that to get to people to understand, but we just have to keep reiterating over and over that this is the condition we live with and we don't get to pick and choose.
Absolutely. Very well said. We've got a question about disability. I don't qualify for healthcare through my state, and I can't afford healthcare on my paycheck. I can't work normal jobs, and I was denied disability. I feel stuck. What can I do?
That's a really hard one because, especially with hypermobility, because there's nothing concrete, as we know, there's nothing that says this is what caused that. You're going to have to work extremely closely with your doctors,
But she doesn't have insurance.
or try to. Without insurance, it's going to be difficult to get to that point. There's not a really good answer to this one, simply because there are so many variables involved. To say, well, this is how I do it, or how you should do it, it's very difficult. I mean, I really don't know how to answer that for you.
You know what? Repeat the question for me, please, Estelle.
So I can't get healthcare through my state, and I can't afford healthcare on my paycheck. I can't work normal jobs and was denied disability. I feel stuck. What should I do?
Okay.
Well, I know from a society point of view, we've got a lot of literature available on our website, and we also have, if you go through our YouTube page, and if you go through,
That's a good
you
idea.
know, in the Nashville conference playlist, we have John Rodas and Kathleen Kane, and they gave a talk at the conference about how to pursue disability, what to do when you're denied over and over again. There are ways to fight it. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of support, but it is possible. So go ahead and check out our YouTube page and go ahead and watch that video. There's a lot of really good advice on how you can take steps to get disability, even if you've been denied 2 or 3 times.
Something that I just thought about, and I don't know how it works in your state or your community. Here in Northern California, our counties have a vocational rehab, and it usually doesn't cost the participant any money to go in to figure out what they can and cannot do. Basically, I have a kind of a disability, but I've not been diagnosed with a disability. I need to figure out what I can do for work, and they help you figure that out and train you. And then if you're unable to work, period, they may be able to help you start filing a claim for disability with some sort of tangible backing to your claim. That's something that just kind of occurred to me right now. Again, I don't know what state you're calling from or what the regulations, but in California we have what's called vocational rehab, and that may be a resource for you to either finding work and or maybe getting that diagnosis towards disability.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Another thing you can do is reach out to our helpline, www.ehlers-danlos.com/EDS-helpline. They are fantastic. No matter where you're from, they will help you find the right people to start getting your case together, and they will help with any other medical questions you have, or if you're looking for a doctor, they'll be able to help you with that as well. So there's lots of resources on the society page as well. So this is more of a personal experience question. What is the biggest thing you have done for your health? My 12-year-old has EDS and of course POTS, gastroparesis, and mast cell, and we are walking this road. What would be your biggest word of advice?
Get involved with community. There's the person, whether it's a child or an adult, they have to know that they're not alone. That's the first and foremost important thing, especially with this disease, especially when you've been told over and over, there's nothing wrong with you, it's in your head. And if you have a child, why me? Why me? I mean, I don't want this. What did I do wrong? At the EDS conference, they have a child's group that's put together. This is more often than not, this is the first time these children have ever seen another child with EDS. Get involved with a meetup that will include children, things of that nature, because that's for a child, especially a child, they have to know they're not alone, and that even though that they have this, that there is somebody out there who knows what they're going through, because their friends aren't going to understand why little Jimmy can't come and play baseball, why Sarah can't go swing on the monkey bars. They just don't get it. They don't understand it. And it's hard for them to connect with somebody who doesn't understand. It's got to be the support system that they need. And again, like I say, the conference has that. Check with meetups, see what they have, start a meetup.
There's online communities too, but I tell you ahead of time, be very, very cautious about those online communities. You want to make sure you're in an appropriate one. And there is a group called The Almighty, and there is young people on that one. There is online communities. If you look up Ehlers-Danlos, there's groups all over the country, all over the world, and there are some that are ran for kids. But again, you need to monitor that. The biggest thing is, like my husband said, it is the support system. We happen to know a young man who struggles. He is actually got one of the worst cases known. He's being studied. He also has VEDS, the worst one you can have. And he has so far survived to about 14 years old, thank goodness. But boy, he struggles big time. And one of the things that he has pointed out that helps him is being online around others, talking to others about what they go through and how each other can overcome it. But that is the biggest thing, peer groups, big time.
Absolutely. If anybody tuned into the stream of the Nashville conference, you might have seen me give a little talk on stage. And for me, the biggest thing that I have done for my health is just acceptance. My first conference was 10 years ago, and I said, I don't know anybody, I don't know anything about EDS. So, I was, I think, 18, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to take apples to apples, and I'm just going to walk up to anybody that looks remotely my age and see if they want to meet in the lobby to play. And
Mhm.
group of friends includes Kathy's cousin, fun little fact, but those friends that I met that first time, that first night I was there, almost immediately, it felt like I was home. We were sitting together, somebody would dislocate or something would happen. Nobody made a big deal about it. It was like, oh yeah, I do that all the time. Here's how I fix it. So
Yeah,
meeting
exactly.
them and getting that acceptance not only made me realize that, okay, I don't want to use a cane, I don't want to do this, but I'm worthy of feeling better. And if it takes using that, I don't owe anybody in the world anything, just myself. And
Mhm.
it led me down the road of research. I started learning all I could about my conditions, and it really helped improve not only my physical health, but mental health as well. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to, either because of the stigma behind mental health or because we're so caught up in taking care of the physical that we just let the mental health lapse. But yeah, support, read, research, community, those are some of the best things you can do because you will get such good resources out of all of those. It will be life changing.
I also, if you can make it happen, I recommend going to the conferences. They do have a section of the conferences that are designated only for kids. Um, my cousin is one of them who helps out with that group, but it's an amazing group of people that are doing it. Um, and the kids actually get to be with each other and support one another and help one another and compare stories of what works. And they also like to have fun with it. I mean, they're able to make fun of each other and have a good time with it because they each understand what the other is going through.
Exactly. It's a nice little break from the world that they're stuck in all of the time. To just
Yes.
feel normal for 3 days, the difference between when they walk in that room that first day, they're hesitant, they're like, oh, mom and dad are making me come to this thing with other kids, and then you see them just slowly open up and realize that with everybody here, I'm normal. I'm not the odd one out. People aren't judging me, people aren't questioning everything. And it's just to see the change in them over the course of the 3 days really hammers home why we do what we do.
Feeling normal is imperative, and that is exactly it. They have a chance to be able to feel normal.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So to kind of go along that line, next question is, I feel guilty or fake using a mobility aid due to attitudes of my friends, families, employers, or society. How do I come to terms with this?
Personally, I fight guilt every day, but I can tell you this, my dislocations get to the point now where it's getting out of hand, and I simply just don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm seriously at that point. Um,
Yeah. The one thing that I kind of reiterate to people about things like this is that they own that. You don't. And I'm not. And one thing I had to really work with Kathy on was that she kept, it's me, it's me, it's me. I'm like, it's not, it's them. You didn't ask for this. You are not doing anything wrong. Yet they're perceiving that that's their problem. It's not our problem. I know it's easy. It sounds easier than it actually is, but you can only own your responsibility. You can't own theirs. And unfortunately, EDS can be a lonely world because you're you end up pulling away, or people pull away from you. There's nothing to be guilty over. It's a frustrating disease. It's heartbreaking. It's debilitating, and nobody can understand it. I mean, one of the things that we heard early on was that EDS is a terrible thing, and it's worse than cancer. And somebody said, well, the difference between EDS and cancer is that if you're a cancer patient, you will die or you will be cured. EDS is afforded neither. And that's like, it's heartbreaking to have to put it in those kind of terms. So why are you feeling guilty over something that you have no control over? It's, again, easier said than done. But you can't own other people's opinions. You can't own other people's their reactions to you. You can only own your own responsibility, your own actions. That's the best I can offer you on that. Again, it's going to be it leads to being a lonely world, unfortunately.
Yeah, and also I recommend highly is to get go get therapy. It'll help you. I finally started doing that, and it has helped me tremendously. Because I feel guilty over a lot of stuff. I mean, you definitely learn who your friends are. You learn your support system is either going to stick with you or they're going to leave. It's just, there's a lot out there that you go through. And I have any possible thing in the world that you can feel guilty over, I have owned it. So I have learned to let it go. But getting therapy has helped tremendously. So I do highly recommend that. It's just an added support system. And it's not easy living with this terrible disorder. It sucks. It really sucks. But do the best you can, hold your head high, and only be true to yourself.
Now, going off something that Carlos said about the whole cancer thing, we had a comment come through, and it was actually the same exact quote I heard right after I got my diagnosis. I went to see a specialist that had EDS and was knowledgeable with EDS, and this person goes, a medical student once told me, you don't have cancer, kids with cancer are dying. I don't know how to respond to that. I had something similar happen to me. It's, well, you don't have cancer, so things could be worse. And that really, that shook me, and that really had an impact on both my physical and my mental health, because I had just gotten my confirmation that, you do have EDS. I'm like, okay, I was right. There is something wrong with me. It has a name. I can, attack it full force and better myself. And then hearing that threw me. And it took me a couple years to deal with it. But if back in that doctor's appointment, when that doctor said, you don't have cancer, it could be so much worse, I would respond with, it doesn't matter if you're drowning in 10 feet of water or if you're drowning in 3 feet of water. Your suffering and your struggles are yours, and they are just as serious as somebody with something else. Just because somebody has cancer doesn't mean your EDS issues are nothing or less. Just because you have EDS doesn't mean somebody with cystic fibrosis isn't suffering as much as you are. It's all relative. So
yes.
Now you have a doctor that says, oh, it's not as bad as this, or it can't be that. Well, guess what? You don't have those things. You're dealing with EDS, and that's what the doctor should be focusing on. And any doctor that does that doesn't have your best well-being in the front of their mind. So that's another thing to think about with, is this a doctor you want to keep seeing? Because you deserve the best care you can get.
And that's exactly why you need to self-advocate big time. Okay, Ask Joe, anything else?
We've got a lot of thank yous to you guys, so I will mirror the chat and say thank you so much for talking about this. And it looks like we've got one more.
Okay.
I teach pre-meds, which gives me a good chance to educate future doctors when they ask me about my braces. Unfortunately, because I work and I don't have a place to rest at work, I don't have the energy or time to meet with my local EDS community, and sometimes not even enough mental spoons for online communities. The nebulous space well enough to work, but not well enough to be coherent outside of work it feels like it too. When did you decide to stop? When do you decide to stop working? Should it be led by a doctor's decision, employer led, decide yourself? Any input on that?
Yeah, I do. Again, I think the big thing is you have to self-advocate, and if you feel you'll get to that point where enough is enough, and you have to push the doctor. If you feel, personally, if I were in the situation that you're describing to me, that is enough. So if you're in a frame of mind where you're willing to go toward disability, then start going that direction. It's not an easy decision to make psychologically, because we're in, I was 50 when I stopped working. And I still struggle with not working. I would prefer to be out there working in the real world. It's taken a lot out of me to be able to make the decision that I simply cannot do it. But I've been through enough, and I have a huge line of team of doctors that will, at this point in time, have backed me and have supported me through the disability angle. So you kind of have to get to that point mentally. And again, I highly recommend getting yourself into therapy, because when you get to that point where you can't do anything but work, it's not a healthy place to be emotionally.
Yeah, you have to take a hard look at yourself and come to whatever realization it is that this is where I am and this is what is in my best interest at this point. Because we all believe that we should, like, I'm still young enough to work. I feel okay to work, but then you're out of spoons at the end of the day. You're borrowing spoons from the next day. At some point, you're just gonna get fed up and burned out. And that's why I say you have to take a hard look at where I'm at, where is it that I want to be, and what do I need to do to get there. And if that means looking at a disability, then that's the course of action you need to take. If you feel that that your purpose is different than what you think you need to be doing, then you need to pursue that. If working is what's important, being a teacher is what's important, then obviously continue with that endeavor. If you feel like I have to teach, but I can't do it, can you go part-time? Can you reduce yourself to taking care of yourself but continue to educate? It's a hard path to walk, because you have to really evaluate what can I do versus what I can't do, and what is going to make me happy long term. And there's just so many different avenues and roads to that. It's very difficult. And unfortunately, like this disease, it affects us differently, and we have to follow our courses differently, but we have to do what's best in our best interest. We're not doing what's in other people's best interest, because other people aren't suffering from this condition like we are, or you guys are.
Yeah, and how we mentioned earlier, maybe sit down with your boss and say, hey, look, my passion is teaching. I love what I do. Can we make, a few more adjustments to the work environment? Can we maybe get like a cot that I could put in my office or somewhere, like in a break room, so you have some place to lay down, get your feet up? See if there's any accommodations that your employers are willing to work with, because they, by law, are supposed to be helping you and accommodate you however they can to keep you working.
That actually depends on what state they're in.
Yeah.
So,
But it's worth, you know, sitting down with your boss and saying, hey, look,
yes.
I love this. I know I love this. This is what I'm dealing with. How can we work together to improve this situation? So again, communication, talking, and stuff like that.
Yes.
It's not an easy road, like Carlos was saying, you know, but you do what you need to do for yourself, because at the end of the day, the only person who is going to suffer is yourself. So it's finding that balance between following your passion, but also making sure you're keeping yourself as healthy as possible.
Yeah, we're by no stretch of the imagination experts on any of this. We, like the rest of you, are learning as we're going. We're just giving what our opinions, the things that we've learned. We're still learning. So you'll be able to figure out what's best for you somewhere down the road. And like I said, what we say here today may work for some things, may not work for others. But eventually you're going to figure out what works for you. And that's what you have to focus on, is what works for me.
But to go along with that, I keep saying over and over to everybody in my personal life as well, I have to stay true to myself first and foremost. And I have to self-advocate. So those two things need to be at the top of your mind with all decisions that you decide to go forward with.
Absolutely. So we've got a participant in the chat that's raising their hand. I sent you a message. If you're trying to answer a question, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it. But we're about to wrap up. So if you do have any more questions that we didn't get to today, please send an email, or you can even call into our hotline. That is ehlers-danlos.com/EDS-helpline. And they will help answer any question you might have, from finding a doctor in your area, how to get accommodations for your children at school, how to get accommodations at work, to answering medical questions. They are fantastic staff. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of you for coming out today. The presentation was phenomenal. It's a very good place to start this conversation, because this is a conversation that we need to start and not stop talking about it. So when you get here today, take what you learned and share that on social media. Get involved in our Breaking Barriers campaign. Tell your story, because that is the best way you can go about overcoming the stigma of disability that we face.
Exactly. And to know that you're not alone and that we're in this together.
Exactly. So if you'd like more information about anything that we talked about today, please check out our website for resources information. Feel free to give our helpline a call or an email. Feel free to reach out to me personally. You could find me on the website. All of my contact info is on there. And definitely consider signing up for our newsletter if you haven't already. It is a fantastic source of the most up-to-date information and upcoming events. Our next webinar will be on February 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We are having Crystal O'Loughlin presenting Caring for the Caregivers, Sensory Solutions for Caregiver CTSD, or Chronic Traumatic Stress Disorder. That webinar is going to focus on self-care and support for caregivers, with a special focus on mothers. You can look up for that sign up either by the end of the day or the start of next week. Again, thank you, Kathy and Carlos, so much for your presentation. It was fantastic. It opened up some great conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Technology permitting, you'll be able to watch this webinar again once we get it through post-production and up on YouTube. If you found this webinar helpful in any way, please consider hitting that like button once it's posted, and subscribe to our channel. That way you can get an alert when we upload our videos. There's also a donation in the top right of the YouTube homepage. It's thanks to donations that allow us to continue to provide programs like our webinars and other great projects and research we're undertaking. Again, Kathy, I can't thank you enough for coming out here. Carlos as well. I hope you and everybody that has joined us today has a wonderful, safe, warm, if it's cold by you, and enjoyable day. And may your health be as good as it can be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.